Hey, what's up? Welcome to the video. Today we're going to talk about graduate schemes versus graduate jobs, looking at the pros and cons of both. So if you're debating either doing a job or a scheme after university, I'm making this video to help make the decision a little bit easier. I did a 3-year-long commercial graduate scheme. It was my top choice and I've successfully rolled off that. So graduate schemes versus graduate jobs. Let's get into it. Before we talk differences, let's talk through the similarities between jobs and schemes. You're going to be employed by a company to do a job, you're going to get paid, and they're both for graduates. But that's pretty much where the similarities end. The key element that separates a graduate scheme is that rotational element, rotating around different roles and functions and businesses within one organization. When I say rotating around businesses within one organization, think of Unilever. It owns PG Tips, it owns Tresemme, Lynx, and a ton of other brands. On one of your placements for 6 months, you might be doing the finance for Tresemme, and then in another placement, you might be marketing for PG Tips. They're gonna look very different. Typically, these big companies almost consider them holding companies that own many different brands and entities underneath it, and that's what you're gonna rotate between. When I say rotating around functions, it depends how broad your graduate scheme is. Mine was commercial, so I could have been in anything from sales, marketing, HR, finance, supply chain, anything that encompasses commercial. And when I say rotating around roles, in one placement you could be a data analyst, and in the second you could be a project manager. One of my friends who did the Centrica business management scheme, on one of his placements he was a team leader for a contact center, so basically a call center manager. The second element that defines a graduate scheme is typically they're going to be offered by bigger companies because they're a certain size and scale to offer a well thought out program, and they've got the resource to attract the top talent by offering the best packages. There's also a big benefit to these companies centralizing and standardizing the graduate recruitment intake. If they're going to hire graduates anyway, because companies have a natural attrition rate, there's going to be people leave and they're going to have to replace them roles with these entry-level graduates. If they can standardize that process, there's going to be a lot of cost efficiencies and savings. It will avoid managers having their own styles of recruitment, hiring at different times of year. If they can standardize and centralize that, there's going to be a lot of efficiencies gained. So the person who's typically going to be recruiting you isn't necessarily going to be your line manager when you're applying for grad schemes. It will be central HR and a couple of people they've roped in to help with the interviews. Typically, if you're going to do a graduate scheme, you will be paid more for doing that scheme than a graduate job. It is difficult to get the exact statistics online because there's so many variables, but here's a couple that I got. On savethestudent.org, they say that the average graduate salary in the UK is just over 24,000. When specifically looking at graduate schemes, Glassdoor says that the average salary is 28,847. There is so many different variables that's going to impact this. However, what you want to take from this, for doing a graduate scheme versus a graduate job, you will be paid a few thousand more for doing a very similar role. The recruitment process for a graduate scheme is going to be so much more structured than a graduate job. Typically, you're going to have to do an application with a few aptitude tests, do an interview or two, and an assessment center. For a graduate job, you might do a similar process, but it's going to vary, and maybe you just need an interview or two. For a graduate scheme, you're going to do way more than just an interview. They're going to be open for applicants around September time and align that with your academic year, and you're going to start that graduate scheme 1 year later around that following September. Graduate jobs, however, are going to be open for applicants as soon as they're a vacancy. So typically you can get a graduate job all year round. Let's talk through now whether you're the right person to do a graduate scheme or whether you should avoid them at all costs. Graduate schemes are going to be really good for someone who's very career orientated, very driven, however not exactly sure what exact role and function they want to pursue. Because you can get such a diverse amount of experiences on a graduate scheme, it's going to really help by the end of that scheme clear up what you want to do. Worst case, it's going to help you decide what you don't want to do. I applied for graduate schemes because I generally wanted to get into commercial, but I wasn't exactly sure what career, what role I wanted to go into. But now after the scheme, I'm a little bit more clear on what I'd like to do, and I'm also clear on what I don't want to do. I was able to do roles in supply chain, in marketing, and in sales, and also analyst roles, project manager roles, a variety of different roles within these functions. So it's really helped clear up what I like to do and what I don't like to do. Applying for graduate schemes, there will be a minimum requirement. They will typically want you to have a 2-1 above, also a minimum amount of UCAS points, so grades in your A level. There will be certain companies that offer 2 2s and above. However, just because these companies get hundreds, if not thousands of applicants, they can filter out the 2 2s. It's going to help wean the candidates down. Graduate schemes also come with very structured, formalized training and mentoring. Graduate jobs also might offer that. However, for a graduate scheme, you're definitely going to get it. Graduate jobs, it might be hit or miss depending on the company. However, graduate schemes, if you're looking for a more structured, formalized training program, even leaving that scheme with a formal qualification, graduate schemes will be really good for you. Finally, on graduate schemes, there will be an expectation of performance, but they will be a little more lenient on whether you can perform in that role right away. For a graduate job, there will be expectation from day one, you're going to be up to speed and performing in a role. Whereas a graduate scheme, because they throw you around the business and they challenge you as much as possible, for the first few months at least in a placement, there won't be much expectation that you can perform. But for a graduate job, they probably want you to have a minimum level of performance. Where a graduate scheme, they're willingly and knowingly throwing you into a role that you probably don't know much about. So they might be a little lenient, at least for the first few months, on your performance. Let's talk through now who should avoid graduate schemes. And I do have a video why not to get a graduate scheme, so I'm going to borrow from that video. After this one, make sure to check it out and I will link it. Firstly, the key element of a grad scheme, that rotating, also does have a flip side, and it might land you in roles you're not that keen on. So on my final placement, I was absolutely gunning for a sales role, but when it came to my panel, my review, they decided what would be best for me is another supply chain role. And I must admit, in hindsight, I still get frustrated that they took that decision. And I think if I had that sales role on my scheme, I could have maybe jumped a promotion level. Whereas what I had to do was get another entry-level sales role, and my promotion is now a year and a half around the corner. So I was a little frustrated, so do be aware, if you do a graduate scheme, some placements you're going to absolutely love and some placements you might not love so much. Also, there's an element of rotating, moving around the country. If you're really dead set on a location, make sure that company's offices don't have offices all around the country. If you work for Nestle, it could be in York. If you work for Aldi, the head office is Birmingham. So it's not always going to be in central London. As things get a bit more virtual, maybe that won't impact you as much. And if you're keen on London, 50+% of graduate roles will be based there. However, just be aware, there's plenty of companies for cost saving that are based elsewhere in the country. There is an expectation that comes with graduate schemes that you're going to see that program through. If you're debating moving after a month or two, or maybe a year, you might be better served doing a graduate job. If you're really keen to move around as much as possible, a graduate job will allow that more. Whereas the scheme, you really want to get the maximum benefit, see that scheme through and get a couple of promotions off of it. You spent all that time learning the business, growing a network. To really maximize it, you're going to want to springboard off the scheme, use that momentum to get that couple of promotions. However, if you want to move around companies, you might be better suited doing a graduate job. Not to say on a scheme you can't leave, you can't apply for other companies, you're going to have that big brand in your CV, you're going to look like a real top performer. However, if you're going to leave after a year, they're going to question why you didn't see that scheme through. I want to include this because I have a huge passion for entrepreneurship and starting a business. But if you've ever considered starting your own business and you have ambitions for working for yourself one day, graduate schemes allow you to gain a lot of knowledge and experience that you can apply to your own business. So if you're debating starting a business, the best thing to do would be to start one right away. You're not going to gain as much knowledge on a scheme as you will just running a business. However, graduate schemes will position you really well that you can use all that experience and knowledge, managing and gaining capital, hiring and firing, supply chain, sales, marketing, really understanding how a big business does it. You can apply that to yours. And I'm confident no matter what business I would start now, it would be semi-successful. And a big reason behind that is I did my graduate scheme. People say that if you want to start a business, get a job that allows you to learn enough that you can one day quit and start your own business. Not to say, if anyone's watching, that I'm going to do this. I'm just saying the skill set I've gained will be invaluable in terms of running, growing and starting a business. I have a ton of videos on the channel about graduate jobs and graduate schemes, how to get one and my experience on it. So please check them out. I'm going to link a couple that will be most relevant to this video. If you've got value from this one, please smash like, comment below. What are your thoughts to do after university? Are you thinking graduate scheme or graduate job? And I'll see you in the next episode. Boom.